Good evening, and thank you for joining us watching Live with Faye. Like we do every day, we pick up a topic and put together a team of people who understand that topic really well, who aid in our understanding of the subject. Now, quick reminder to everyone to subscribe to our channel and let your friends and family know as well that we're having these discussions on a daily basis, and they can subscribe to the channel as well. Today, we're going to look at the Aarogya Setu app. Now, it's been in the news over the last 24 hours because the CIC, which is the Information Commissioner, has sent a notice to the Ministry of Information and Technology and to several other departments in that ministry for basically giving what the CIC has described as preposterous responses to RTI requests. Now, the RTI request was to basically ask for details on who has designed this app and effectively who's involved in the design of the app. And the answer was nobody knows. Now, the government of India has come out and responded since then. We understand the IT ministry has said that the app was deployed by the NIC, the National Information Centre, along with industry and academia. Couple of questions that we have to ask is this. Is this really an example of how little respect government organizations have for RTI, that they basically choose not to respond at all? Or is there a serious problem in the way that this app is designed, the way the data is being collected, the way the data is being stored? Remember, when the app was actually released, there was a lot of frowning and worrying about the amount of data and access the app was getting to our phones and where the data was going to be stored, and if it was going to be continued to be stored even after this COVID problem goes away, hopefully very soon. So these are the questions that we're asking today. Is there a reason to worry about the Aarogya Setu app? Has the government not been forthcoming enough about details? So this is not only to do with the RTI, but slightly broader on the entire app altogether. To help us answer these questions, we're joined by Pawan Duggal, who is an advocate who specializes really in the field of cyber law. Apar Gupta joins us as well. He's the Executive Director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. And we also have Aditi Agarwal, Senior Research Associate at Media Nama, who's been tracking the Aarogya Setu story. I welcome all three of you to this conversation, and to our viewers, remember to use the super chat feature, and we will try and take as many of your questions as we can, because this is a complicated issue for me particularly. I'm not an expert, so I'm going to try and ask as many questions as we can, so we can all understand this better at the end of it. Let me start with Apar Gupta. Apar, I remember having a conversation about this app when it came out, because people are like, okay, it's effectively, it can tell where one has gone, who you have met, what your entire, who you've had conversations with, which seems intrusive. Does this latest story from the CIC concern you? Should we all be worried?
Thank you so much, Faye. And there are two broad patterns which are evident here. One is essentially a very low respect being accorded to the right to information. Also in terms of proactive disclosures, because the Right to Information Act also requires government to proactively publish information and provide a reasoned basis in terms of transparency. Why is it taking a specific measure, and what can be a much more important measure than a core part of its policy design in determining how it will be dealing with COVID, given that COVID has impacted all aspects of our life across all strata of society. So it's firstly not put out the information which it needed to put out initially. From when the app was first launched on April 2nd, 2020, immediately we filed RTI applications on April 4th, 2020 with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, as well as with the National Informatics Centre. Now, one is a ministry, one is a department. The ministry you would expect to be at least have a certain level of knowledge, at least be a stakeholder in the development of the app, given that it's a core development which is aimed towards safeguarding public health. But the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare says it has no information and transfers that RTI, which seeks information about the legislative framework, that kind of data collected, as you were just saying, the storage and the duration of that storage after a person deletes the app, the list of government officials who have access to this data, and the organizations with whom it's developed. And it says it has no information. So our principal ministry, which is tasked with looking after the COVID healthcare effort, in a sense, has no information on the principal technical deployment aimed towards tackling COVID by itself. And I think this is confirmed by RTIs, by other people as well. And subsequently, the NIC also transfers parts of these queries back to its parent ministry, which is the Ministry of Electronics and IT. And through this entire Sarkari apparatus, the RTI keeps going till it's eventually frustrated. And we filed several of them, and we have documented this to a great length. So I would say it is a complete evasion of transparency. And I'd like to also open up this debate for the other panelists on the aspect of the source code, which was initially denied under RTI and then subsequently open sourced. And I'm putting this in air quotes because I hope others can fill in some context on it.
You know, in fact, Abhishek Gupta has also asked that question right now on our chat window. He says, wasn't the source code of the app released a few months ago? Bharat Raval says, is this a ghost app promoted by the Prime Minister? What's going to come next? So let's take these one by one. Let's talk first about the source code. Again, for someone like me who doesn't understand what the source code is, and if it has been made public, what does that mean? Pawan, Duggal, do you want to take a stab at that? The source code apparently, and even in the government's response, it says we've put out the source code. We've made everything public. There shouldn't be a problem. Is there a problem? Was there a problem with that source code? What does that mean?
Well, first and foremost, you need to understand the paternity of the source code. You need to understand who has created that. What kind of bugs, what kind of backdoors have already been put in the source code. First and foremost, the kind of diversity of approaches and perspectives taken by the governmental ministries since the time lockdown began till now on Aarogya Setu have been pretty diverse, and they're often contradictory. So at one point of time, as a nation, we are made to believe this is the Government of India app, contact tracing app. But when it comes to who's created it, even after 7 months of the lockdown, there's no clarity as to who is the creator. Well, that tends to put in large number of questions on of suspicion on this kind of, primarily because I believe that this app to a large extent is violative of your privacy. And as it's actually capturing a lot of information, which a lot of people don't know where it's actually going. To give an example, I download the app today. That's on day 1. On day 45, I become COVID positive. This app would technically tells us that the data of yours being COVID positive will then be transmitted in an encrypted manner to the server on day 45. This is not telling you that every 15 minutes it's collecting your data. But what's happening on my data, every 15 minutes that's collected from day 1 to day 45, where is it going? Who all is storing it? Who all is accessing it? For what purpose it's going to be accessed? Are questions that are clearly left blank and unanswered. On top of it, we have a ministerial statement who says that, well, COVID-19 will be here for a couple of years after COVID is gone. So in a scenario like this, I'm actually seeing this Aarogya Setu app primarily becoming a manifestation of increasing state power, of infringement of individual liberties, and lack of transparency in this particular regard. I think the people have a right to know. Yes, it's a public health emergency. You are entitled to take all steps to fight the public health emergency. But COVID is not an excuse to trample the constitutional liberties and the guarantees that have been given in this living constitution. So I think there are so many more questions that are being raised than answers being given. And this latest chapter of this ping pong approach of no ministry knowing who's the author or the creator of the app is further adding a lot of suspicion to this already very controversial initiative, which is bound to come and haunt large number of Indians and their data in the coming times.
I just want to point out to our audience that the Aarogya Setu app has followed the Aadhaar format, which is that it is not compulsory, but if you want to exist, it's compulsory. You can't take a flight, you can't enter most offices, you can't get anything done without showing the Aarogya Setu app on your phone. So technically you can choose not to use it, but that means that you basically can't do any work at all. And that's actually worrying. Aman Peshabri has asked a very important question. Also, Aman, thank you for the contribution to our team. He says, as someone who doesn't understand or know much about this app is tracking our movements as public places like malls, restaurants, etc. to check if the app, we have to check the app before letting us in. Is the government allowed to do this? Does tracking citizens and their data undermine India's democracy? And that's a really important question. But before I get to that, Mr. Duggal, in response to what you already said, the government's response today from the IT Ministry says the app was deployed by the NIC, the National Informatics Centre, I beg your pardon, and in collaboration with industry and academia. Do you see that as a satisfactory clarification? My point, I mean, do you see this as a clarification at all?
That's not a clarification at all, because this is just a facade that's being created. How much time and how much long has it taken for NIC to actually come and shout, it's my baby? But till now, we don't know who in NIC has created what. To a large extent, it could be an external product which has got internalized, got the stamping of NIC, and has been now produced as an NIC product per se. So I think this is not at all a satisfactory explanation. You have to tell us who the coder is, who has developed, who's done the coding, what kind of parameters have been followed in doing the coding, what kind of architectures have been followed, how have the constitutional protections under Justice Puttaswamy's judgment on privacy been specifically kept in mind while coding this particular app, and how this app is not becoming an instrumentality of increasing state power in the biggest democracy of the world. Well, there's already a big change globally. In my recent book called New Cyber World Order Post-COVID-19, I've actually looked at these very important changes happening in cyberspace. And Indian approach on Aarogya Setu is also a representation of a trend in this regard, of increasing state power who's using COVID-19 and contact tracing as a methodology and mechanism for increasingly collecting data for the purposes of potential usage at a later point of time. So I think this explanation is completely not satisfactory. You need, whenever you go at international standards or platforms, you get specific details of who the creators are of what of these coding processes. Merely saying it's NIC when the intrinsic inherent capability is non-existent in that organization, I think far more clarity would be required.
Right, and I just want to bring in our other guest as well. We have Aditi Agarwal. Aditi, thank you for joining us. And I know that you've been covering the Aarogya Setu app and the controversies around it quite closely. Would you tell us what kind of details this app takes from our phone? So effectively, what does this app know about us, other than whether or not we're COVID positive?
Thanks, Faye, for having me here. It's an honor, to be honest. In terms of what the app collects, overtly, it asks you for your name, for your age, for your gender, if you have traveled abroad in the last 14 days, your occupation. And earlier, when it was launched on April 2, it also used to ask you whether or not you smoked. Now it has stopped asking that. Now that's on the superficial level. Well, that's overtly. Then in terms of permissions to the phone, it asks you for Bluetooth access as well as location access. Some people had looked under the code before the code was open sourced, and that this was possible only for Android. And that showed that Bluetooth was turned on before the user gave permission. And there were a lot of trackers that are used in ads that were placed within the app to track how long people are spending, what amount of time are people spending on the app, what kind of features do they use, and things like that. Apart from that, since the app was released on April 2, a lot more features have been added over the last 7 months, including whether the ability to see how many COVID-19 positive or at-risk people you've been in touch with, and where these interactions happened. So, and I just want to touch upon a couple of things that have been raised so far, especially about the source code. So in terms of source code, on May 27, the government open sourced the Android code, which is basically to say that they revealed the under the hood details of the app for public auditing. So the same day they said that iOS code, KaiOS code, which is on Geo phones, and the server code will be released shortly. The same day, they also announced an Aarogya Setu Android bug bounty program, where people could potentially look for bugs and potentially earn anywhere from 1 lakh to 3 lakh rupees, depending on the severity of the vulnerability found. Now, iOS code was finally open sourced on August 10. We don't know when KaiOS and server codes will be out. It's precisely where the server code is that everything will be revealed, so to say. But interestingly, something else happened in the meanwhile. A private cybersecurity firm found some issues with the app. They went to NIC CERT and told them about it. And NIC CERT at that time put out a statement which said that the code on GitHub, which is the Android code, is not the production code, it's the test code, which basically means it's a model code, that this is an ideal case situation. This is how we developed the code, but that's not the one that has been implemented. So what's the point of revealing what's under the hood if you have changed the hood, basically? So that's something that happened. Even on GitHub, the contributors barely interact with the issues that are raised by other people. iOS code was open sourced on the government equivalent of GitHub, which is called OpenForge. Again, over there, people can't actually report problems or raise issues. And it's been 2 months since that was open source. And I checked today, that still hasn't improved. Coming to the question of NIC, the day the app was released, and Medianama and the Next Web reported on it before a press release was put out. The press release said that this is developed in a public-private partnership under the guidance of NIC. Now, that's very ambiguous language. And on May 27, when they open sourced the Android source code, they released a list of contributors. What, interestingly, they didn't do is list their affiliations. So it's only through going through every individual LinkedIn profiles there, I was able to deduce that all the government contributors were from NIC. All the private contributors were either from Make My Trip and 1MG. Make My Trip and 1MG, these are private companies. They have denied their involvement in this app since April. It's only now that they're coming out of the woodworks, and Deep Kalra, who's the founder and CEO of Make My Trip, has gone on record and said, yes, 30 people from our team were involved. 1MG had categorically denied its involvement, but the writing is there on the wall. So there has been a lot, even when, as Mr. Duggal said, that the name of each and every individual should be given. Well, they gave it on May 27, but to what end? What was the point of it? Interestingly, I learned from the lawyer who wrote Aarogya Setu's privacy policy and terms and conditions, Rahul Mathan, that no contract was signed between all these private volunteers and the government. Now, as a personal data protection bill, which is currently being deliberated by the Joint Parliamentary Committee, was a law right now, the whole thing would be illegal. Because under that bill, if you are a data fiduciary, which is the government in this case, because that is determining the purpose of data collection and processing, if it contracts another party, which is a data processor, which in this case would be Make My Trip, 1MG, or any of the 34 private contributors, they have to enter a written contract where all the details of what they're supposed to do, what they can do, what they can't do, have to be well defined. In the absence of it, it's illegal. But the caveat there, of course, is it's a bill, it's not a law. So those were just a few points I wanted to make.
That's a very scary point you've made. Just to clarify what you've said, you're saying effectively that through your reporting and investigation, you've discovered that the engineers from Make My Trip and 1MG were part of the coding of this app, although both of these companies for the longest time did not accept that they had team members as part of it. The government has not signed any contract with these private players. So effectively, is it safe to assume that there's been no structuring on whether or not they have access to data, whether they can carry any data back home, whether they can carry any data back to their private employers, whether they can store data with their private employers? And also, would it be safe to assume that these 30 people know their way in and out of that system now because they designed it?
So I'll address the first question first. I had asked these questions to Rahul Matan and Arnab Kumar, who was at that time part of Niti Aayog and spearheading the Aarogya Setu project. And both of them had repeatedly said that all logs, anytime any person logs into the database, all those logs are meticulously maintained. Not everybody has access to data collected. They had also said that data is encrypted at rest and in transit. There were a few points of lack of clarity there, but largely the idea was, well, it's all hunky-dory and it's safe. Your second question is more interesting about whether or not these people still have access. Now, what these companies and Niti Aayog have maintained now that they have handed all operational control to NIC, which should ideally mean that nobody else should be able to access these codes again. Now, if you remember, I mentioned a private cybersecurity firm that had discovered some issues. So what they had discovered was that in the GitHub code that was made open source and that was uploaded again, basically the credentials, which is the username and password used to access the backend of the app, was hard-coded into the code itself. So if anyone went through the code with a fine-toothed comb, they would have found your username and password. So even if you had every possible auditing and oversight mechanism in place, it would have become null and void. NIC CERT in response had said that the moment this company notified them of this issue, they fixed it within 24 hours. Now, that's not a transparent process. So I will take NIC CERT at their face value that yes, they fixed it within 24 hours. But that's 24 hours after this issue was discovered. It was also lying dormant for a significant period of time, potentially. So there's that. Another interesting thing is, I don't know how many of you have heard of Niti Aayog's COVID 20 that was circulated in closed groups a week before Aarogya Setu was launched. And Aarogya Setu is essentially built on top of that skeleton, to the extent that in the first few months, I think first 2 months, April and May, the privacy policy of Aarogya Setu was hosted on COVID 20 servers. So Niti Aayog has never formally been acknowledged as a part of this project, even though when the code was open sourced on May 27, people from MeitY, NEGD had acknowledged the contribution of Amitabh Kant, who is the CEO of Niti Aayog, and Arnab Kumar, the person I mentioned earlier. It's only where I think last week that Deep Kalra in an interaction mentioned that in March, he had gone to Amitabh Kant with the idea of contact tracing app, where he was effectively made the head of business for Aarogya Setu. And in the CIC order that has come out, where the MeitY CTIO acknowledged that some of the material, some of the information is actually with Niti Aayog. And therefore, they would have to go to Niti Aayog, which is where the Information Commissioner was like, what are you talking about? Under Section 6 of RTI Act, you Niti Aayog, what were you waiting for? So I'm sorry I took too much time.
No, you didn't take too much time at all. In fact, a lot of our viewers are asking if we can have Aditi Agarwal on the show more often. And for those who are asking where she works right now, she's a senior research associate with Media Nama. You can look her up. Now that brings us on all of these very important points that Aditi has asked, it brings us to the second half of Aman Peshawari's question. Is this undermining the Indian democracy? And Bharat Rawal says, how can we be sure the app is not infringing on our privacy? So here's the thing. The Supreme Court has said privacy is a fundamental right, but the Indian government has not defined our privacy laws. So, it's almost like, I know I shouldn't be stealing from your dabba, but there is no law that prevents me from doing it. So who's going to stop me? And I'm going to take that question now to the panel of, is it infringing on our privacy, on our rights, and through that to the democracy? Apar, Gupta, that question of what does this mean for us as citizens and what does this mean for the democracy?
So I think contact tracing as well as proximity notification, which can be enabled through technology, are worthwhile measures of public policy responses when one does look at a pandemic such as COVID, which probably comes once in our life. And I think this is a larger conversation around what happens to the very nature of democratic process once that level of restriction is there? Do we have the institutional strength, the rule of law framework to actually go back to the way things were when this seemingly emergent circumstance ends? And secondly, the measures which are taken to deal with this pandemic, to what degree of rule of law do they follow? I think the evasion of responses which have come through on the basis of RTIs and the non-disclosure of information show certain broad characteristics. Number one, the development of the Aarogya Setu app is not followed through procurement norms of the government of India. There are no clear payments, contracts, agreements which have been made. Secondly, transparency is not being followed. It's not institutionally housed. And third is that the data which is being gathered, which is of citizens by itself, which is towards the service of a defined objective of public health, is actually not being centered within the principal ministry, which is tasked with the duty of taking care of our health by itself. Now, when we look at the right to privacy, the Supreme Court said a few things in terms of standards. Number one, there needs to be legality. There needs to be underlying law which authorizes the invasion to privacy. This is absent here because all we have is a protocol of a sense, which is not an act of legislature and hence is not enforceable. In fact, there are questions also arising how this protocol was drafted, what is its intent, and in fact, the litigations which have been filed in the Kerala High Court and have been referred in subsequent disclosures on which some parts and my colleagues have worked are showing that the protocol was actually a response in terms of decreasing risk which would arise from the questions which arise from the court, that why did you not create anything in terms of a law? And we know this government can act really fast. For instance, just a week back when Justice Lokur's name was suggested to head the stubble burning and the government objected to it. And it has subsequently brought out an ordinance, and it in fact requested the Supreme Court not to appoint him. And the remark by the Solicitor General was, this government can act fast. He said it on record in court. So it's not as if for a lack of capacity, the ordinance making power was not initiated towards clothing the Aarogya Setu app within the bounds of law, which is the very basic precondition to fulfill the right to privacy. Of course, there are other conditions. It must have a democratic purpose. I think it does. But the thing is this purpose defined by law? No. Is it necessary and proportional? So it goes to what are the range of capabilities within the app by itself? Is it necessary to take care of COVID? And also in terms of its effectiveness in a country which has just such a low smartphone penetration, is it an effective measure or is it a surveillance tool? So these questions are sometimes asked because they have very disturbing answers. And I think the answer is not rhetorical. Aarogya Setu is a threat to our privacy because we do not know what is its intended purpose and it's not within the boundary of law.
Well, Pawan, Duggal, here a lot of what we're saying here reminds me of the Prime Minister's the PM Cares Fund, because even the PM Cares Fund launched in a hurry, very non-transparent, using the the COVID crisis as sort of a shroud and a reason for taking these emergency measures, and then offering citizens in a democratic country zero information about how these measures are actually being activated. And I just want to tell our audience a story. Like, the building that I live in decided that it will not allow, domestic help maids, drivers into the building unless they can show the Aarogya Setu app. Now, here's the thing. Most of them didn't have smartphones. They were using feature phones. They were required to go out and spend 8,000 to 10,000 rupees buying Chinese phones just so they could show this Aarogya Setu app at the entry of the building to be able to do their jobs. And we know this happened to a lot of people. At the end of the day, there's a sense of zero accountability, Pawan Duggal, from the government. And do you believe that the courts will be able to extract this accountability from government? Is it the job of the courts, to constantly ask for this accountability? Or are we living in a brave new world of an undemocratic system but the government just doesn't feel like they have to share anything with citizens anymore.
First and foremost, the Indian judiciary is one of the most powerful judiciaries in the world, and it has the ability to extract information. However, we have to be also alive to the changing winds of today's times. You have to be alive that it's not just India. It's countries like Hungary, countries like US, Singapore, who are now coming up with all kinds of emergency measures, legislations for the purposes of empowering governments to do more under the garb of fighting coronavirus. So if I was to take the Hungarian example, the Hungarian parliament has actually passed a new law which effectively authorizes the current government to go on governing till such time Hungary conquers the first wave of coronavirus, and till such time it also conquers the other subsequent waves of coronavirus infections. So we are now beginning to see this new trend where governments are increasingly wanting to get more powerful, wanting to get more access to data. And I think this COVID-19 does provide a fantastic opportunities for these kinds of opportunistic vested interests to go and seize power. But having said that, I think the Indian Constitution is a fantastic living document, and it's going to be the balancing factor in our lives. But what's ultimately going to be required is far more questions on accountability, questions of transparency, and the basic rule of law has to be once again established. COVID-19 is not a license to destroy, disregard the principles that have been enshrined in the Constitution. Those principles have withstood the test of time and should be an integral foundation of the pillar of the Indian democracy. So a lot of things will ultimately depend on how things actually evolve. But yes, the winds are changing. Every government, major government in the world is walking in that direction. The Indian approach also appears to be going ahead and moving in that direction. Therefore, the onus becomes even more upon the judiciary to become the safeguarder, the protector of the rights. And ultimately, it also has to do with people getting more aware of what's happening. Yes, internet has suddenly increased. COVID-19 has had the effect of steroids on digitization. But having said that, I think people now need to start getting more consciously careful on when, how, and where their rights, their privacies are being infringed upon.
Mr. Duggal, we know that the Supreme Court had actually said that mandating the use of Aarogya Setu app is illegal, which it had incidentally also said for Aadhaar. But I can't board a flight or enter an airport without downloading this app. I can't enter any public place. I can't enter a place of work. Effectively, I cannot continue living, working, and existing in India as an active citizen without downloading this app. So what is this new? I mean, how is this not in violation of the Supreme Court's judgment? And what is this new loophole of, voluntarily mandatory that the government has found?
I think that's one huge area that needs to be addressed judicially in the courts. Well, the government is very clear. The power of legislation is with the government, so they legislate. The courts are very clear. Their power is not to make law. Their power is to interpret law. So they can at least hold what's good or not good in a particular law. However, that does not really stop the government from bypassing either the judgment or the import of the court in this particular direction. So I think it's a constant, shall I say, a friction that's happening between two major pillars of the Indian government. But having said that, over a period of time, there's going to be some kind of a common ground which is going to emerge. But till that time it happens, I think the more onus and the more expectation will be from the courts to stand up for being the protector of the civil liberties of individuals.
Bringing this back to Aditi right now, also for our audience, I have pasted Aditi's article, very comprehensive article on Media Nama in the description next to her name of this video. So you can take a look at it. It's good reading. It's also in the chat window if you find it as well. Aditi, the question that Bharat Rawal is asking is promoting an app that infringes on privacy before we have a privacy law enough to question the government? Because we've seen various arms of the government push from the highest office of the Prime Minister downwards. Everyone is pushing this app in every way. Obviously, it's a good question to ask the government, but have there been any answers at all?
I haven't got any answers on this from the government, to be honest. One argument that I do hear quite often, and which I agree with to a great extent, is that our privacy law has been in the works for quite some time now. Now, until and unless it's till the time it's passed, do we just live in a halfway house kind of a situation where we don't do anything related to privacy data collection or anything? I would say no. But it also means that it places a greater burden on the government to err on the side of caution and minimize data collection, to not have invasive apps in the first place, to not make things mandatory, which are possible only for 35% of the population, to not create so much confusion during health emergencies about whether or not people will be allowed to get their groceries if they don't have an app. So I would say promoting an app, as Apar also said earlier, is justified if you have shown evidence that it works. That evidence hasn't really materialized despite repeated questions raised by civil society as well as media. So, and RTI is a great way to get that kind of information out, but they don't give out that information easily. So that's what I found ironic about this particular case, that NEGD, NIC, and MeitY are saying that we don't have any info on Aarogya Setu. I have personally filed RTIs where I got answers related to Aarogya Setu from NIC. I worked on a story where another civil society activist, Srinivas Kodali, filed an RTI where he got notings related to the Aarogya Setu protocol. The NEGD CEO has been practically advertising this app at every forum. He has given out data related to how much data has been pulled to the server and things like that. So does that really imply absence of information? I don't think it implies that. I think the reasonable conclusion to draw here is the lack of willingness on the part of the government to be transparent, and which is a very, very disturbing conclusion to come to, but the only one that's possible in this case. Also, coming to your point about airports and railways, because you had mentioned that, there was a lot of confusion about what Airports Authority of India wants. And the minister himself caused a lot of confusion in the ambiguous language that he used in the press conference. But finally, in a litigation that was filed in Karnataka High Court, both the Airports Authority of India and the Ministry of Railways submitted that the app is not mandatory to access any services. For rail or air passengers. Now, you and I know it because we are on digital media, but all those migrants who were forced to take trains, who were basically packed like sardines, do they know that? What are the chances that they were forced? There was a conversation that Internet Freedom Foundation had organized with MP Mahua Moitra, where she pointed out that she boarded a train without showing them the app. And when they asked her, oh, wait, that was with you. Sorry, Faye. I completely talked to her about it. And she pointed that out. And I couldn't help but think at that time, but that's her privilege. Even if people don't recognize her as the MP, that's her privilege that allows her to do that. All of us know people who have been stopped from accessing public services or from accessing private places if they haven't had the app. And the Karnataka High Court also said that in the absence of law, no government agency, whether central or state, can deny any public services to any citizen just on the basis of not installing this app. And that's something crucial that all of us must know.
Yes, and you're referring to a conversation that I had with Mahua Moitra on this very matter, where she said she went to the train station and she said, sorry, it's the law. I don't have to download it. I'm getting on the train. You're right. It was her privilege that she had access to that information. I mean, consider someone standing in front of an airport. And I saw this happen when I was boarding a flight on Friday, when there was an elderly gentleman who was told, no, you need this app. And he started to panic because obviously he was not someone who was used to downloading apps on his phone on his own. Maybe he had children or family members who would help him with it. He was obviously getting late for a flight. So having information, and it's coming at a time, that demand comes at a time when the person is nervous. You need to board a flight, you need to board a train, there's a time limit to what's going on. It's not a time that you want to stand there and have an argument with the security person. The other question that we must ask is, when this app was actually launched, India was still in that phase of contact tracing. let's be honest about the fact we are well into a full-blown community transmission. When someone declares that they are COVID positive on Twitter, you're not tracing who this person came in contact with. They just say, anyone who spoke to me over the last 3 days, please get yourself tested, right? So what is the purpose really of contact tracing through the app anymore? Is it something that's actually active? Given the fact that we've opened everything else up right now, is the app actually serving any purpose, is a question that we should also ask. But the question that I want to ask is what Usha Kalva has asked on our chat window, which is important. She says, why is this important? When we give permissions to other apps on our phone without really caring, why not to this one? Maybe how and why can this data be used? Apar, Gupta, that's the question, and this is an argument that comes up a lot. You're giving your data to Facebook, you're giving your data willingly to YouTube, or to Google, I'm sorry, and YouTube by extension. Why do we have a problem when we're giving data to the government of India? Why should this be of concern?
So that's a great framing. I think I faced it as a counsel in Aadhaar quite often, and on Twitter, and all of us face it. So let's all take that chip and the different ways we respond to it. The first way is that framing is actually a very honest framing. It emerges from acknowledging that there's a large amount of data collection which is not right. It's toxic, right? And it's ungoverned. So the concerns which are being highlighted by a speaker, or when they frame this question, if we take it at good faith, which I think I should, okay, and I will, is that the data which Facebook and Google are gathering and the permissions that they are taking from my phone make me feel uncomfortable. And I acknowledge it, and I say that they should not do it. You need a system of protection and regulation. And who will do that for you? That will be your government, right? Your democratically elected choice, which has the power to make laws and to actually make sure these protections are in place. So when it does these same kind of activities, it at least can set a prescriptive example if it is still in the process of development of a larger, much more evolved structure, which is the data protection bill. So one does not expect a voluntary, unenforceable data sharing protocol for Aarogya Setu, which gives these permissions, which does not have oversight, which does not have a body, which does not have for enforcement, which does not have even a proper sunset clause, even though they call it a sunset clause, which has several deficiencies and is essentially a marketing ploy in terms of providing you that level of protection. And this brings me, what is the purpose of the app? One of the answers we did get from the NIC when we asked who has access to the data under the app, it was stated as all people and personnel who are involved with COVID-related relief measures. And also the functionality of Aarogya Setu has also been shown to have add-on features which may have a commercial private element attached to them. Now, these are large questions which also emerge from our Aadhaar experience, in which Aadhaar is not only there restricted to availing subsidies and rations for people and checking leakages, which is the state purpose, but also something which was litigated, struck down by the Supreme Court in the second Puttaswamy judgment, and then revived through an ordinance making power and then an act of legislature, that private bodies can utilize Aadhaar for KYC purposes. And it is being used, for instance, on matrimony portals to ensure that the right person with the right Aadhaar is listed there. Or it is used, for instance, in a whole range of activities now. So what is the true purpose of Aarogya Setu if it is not preventing community transmission, given the high incidence infection rate in India, which as per the government's own figure is fairly high? I would say it does play into a larger design of a national data health stack, which has also been commented on by several civil society researchers, as well as practitioners, as well as public health experts, including the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan. So I would look at this in terms of a larger design of surveillance capitalism, and hope that the good faith which is shown in this question is also reflected in governance, because I always hope for the better, even though it may be misguided.
think we should always hope for the better, because what choice do we really have at this point? Isha GP is asking Aditi about Make My Trip and the company denying involvement. She's already answered this question. You will find it about 20 minutes into this video, and we'll mark it as well so you can find it on the playback, because we don't have too much time to sort of get into that again. Aman Peshawari says the app has failed because cases are rising. So what is the app there for? Yes, we've asked that question. Padat Rabal says if there are applications that require privacy invasion to some extent, then should this prioritize the law all the more? That's actually the really important question. And this is actually where everything comes in. The work that all three of my guests are really doing is about privacy laws on the internet. Pawan, Duggal, the government has, and would it be far-fetched to say the government has sort of put data privacy laws in the chiller, in the back burner, because there's all of these interesting things that can be done before this law is brought into play. Let's be honest, there hasn't really been any honest work that has happened on the data privacy law for a few years now.
And logically, it's part of a bigger approach. The approach is, well, for governance, you may require to do a lot of initiatives that may ultimately be constricted by a legislative model which is going to be in place. So till such time, it's a gray zone. It gives a lot of elbow room to the government to go ahead and deal with a lot of issues pertaining to not just data, but also its monetization, its access, and its sharing with large number of governmental authorities and agencies. So I believe there is merit in that particular argument. And till such time, this dedicated data protection law does not come in. It's a gray zone. It allows ample fertile opportunities for potentially misusing it, or shall I say using it in a particular manner so as to suit the governance needs of today's times.
Absolutely. Also to our one of our viewers asking us, can you share the link that I can show at airport, saying I don't need the application. All right, the link is now has been added to the chat window. This is something that the Airports Authority of India submitted to the Karnataka High Court, saying that it's not mandatory to show the Aarogya Setu app. It's in fact voluntary, optional for passengers. You can actually, just a rudimentary, Google search will actually pop that up for you as well. And that should, you'll be able to show that at the doors of the airport to say, hey, you know what, you can't make it compulsory for me to download this app. So obviously there's a lot, of conversation that has to happen around this. Quickly roping in Aditi as well. What is your advice right now to citizens? Should we avoid downloading this app altogether? And also, if we delete the app from our phones, is there a guarantee that our data that has been collected so far will get deleted as well at the back end?
So I'll address the second part first, because that's
yes.
When you delete the app, it takes 30 days for the data to be deleted from the servers if it has been pulled there. Any data on your phone is deleted as per the privacy policy, terms and conditions, protocol, and all my conversations. There's no way I can test that because I don't have that kind of access. However, if you test positive for COVID-19, then your data will still be retained for 60 days on the server. So that I assume to help out with contact tracing. The first question about whether or not you should download the app. I have the app. If I have the app, so yes, but I keep my Bluetooth switched off. I keep my location services switched off. And I have the privilege where I don't have to step out of the house. So my contact tracing as it is practically zero, the contacts that I have. So, but having said that, I do keep my Bluetooth and location services switched off.
Apar or Mr. Duggal, do you want to also answer that question?
Wear a mask. I would just say wear a mask. Okay, new research is showing that the most advanced facial recognition algorithms go crazy with them. And I'm an advocacy organization. I have a very clear view. Don't download the app. Please don't download the app. I think it's a risk. And the government has not put in a law. It needs to build that level of user trust for you to keep it with you, but take all other precautions which are prescribed with medical practitioners, especially wear a mask.
Yes. Mr. Duggal?
I will just like to say this app is something that you need to be away from, primarily because it's going to burn your hands. It's going to not just dig deep into your data, it could potentially come and haunt you in the coming times. So if you are slightly careful about your privacy, this is the app that you should definitely not have on your mobile phone.
All right. I'm going to, just put it this way. So if I were to just gather all of the information that's been given to us, there is a lot of the structure of this app, in the manner in which it has been designed, the lack of information that the government is sharing with us raises eyebrows and frowns many a forehead about the manner in which this has been put together. There's enough to read about it and the questions that are being asked, starting with the articles that, for example, Aditi has written at Medianama. Take some time to read about it. And I think that an informed citizen is the most powerful thing in a democracy. Inform yourself about what is going on. And most importantly, the fact that the government itself has submitted to high courts that this is not compulsory but optional gives you room to decide whether or not you want to download this app. So it's really up to you. It's not compulsory. So you should make this information available to yourself and to everybody else in your life that, listen, there are these questions that are being asked by very qualified people on this app, and it's not compulsory. Because that really is the meaning of a democracy, that you have access to information, you have access to the option not to download it. Having said that, in the middle of a COVID crisis, if it makes you feel safe, that is your right to download the app and to use it. But if the sharing of the information makes you feel unsafe, it's also your right not to download the app and not to give out that information. Like I keep saying, question everything and read as much as you can get your hands on about this app. An empowered and an informed citizen is the most powerful thing in a democracy. Thank you for watching. Remember, we'll try and put in as much reading material as we can into the description of this video so that you can read up more and more about this. Thank you to our panel for joining us, and thank you to our audience for being very generous and for asking very interesting questions this evening. Thanks for watching. Good night.